Welcome back, fellow cyberpunks. Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most heartbreaking character arcs in anime history. This is the story of Lucy from Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and why her final moments on the moon represent something far more tragic than most viewers realize. Picture this. You're watching the final episode of Edgerunners for the first time. The credits roll. Lucy floats alone above the lunar surface, tears streaming down her face as she remembers David. Most people think this is a bittersweet ending. Lucy finally made it to her dream destination, right? She escaped Night City. She's free. She got what she always wanted. But here's the thing that'll shatter your heart once you understand it. Lucy's trip to the moon wasn't the fulfillment of her dream. It was the destruction of everything she actually cared about. And the most devastating part? She promised a dying David that she would go there, even though it meant abandoning the one thing that truly mattered to her. Before we dive into the cosmic tragedy of Lucy's character, let me tell you why this analysis matters. Edgerunners isn't just another anime about cool cyborgs and neon lights. It's a masterclass in character development that explores themes of trauma, love, and the price we pay for survival. Lucy's story specifically examines how our past shapes our fears, and how those fears can ultimately destroy the very things we're trying to protect. I've spent countless hours analyzing every frame of Lucy's journey, from her first appearance as a mysterious netrunner to that final, devastating scene on the moon. What I discovered is a character whose entire arc revolves around a fundamental misunderstanding between what others think she wants and what she actually needs. This isn't just about a girl who wanted to escape to space. This is about someone whose greatest dream was never about leaving Earth at all. So settle in, because we're about to explore the tragic irony of Lucy's story, the psychological warfare she fought against her own past, and why her ending represents one of the most beautifully cruel conclusions in recent anime history. Let's start at the beginning, because Lucy's relationship with the moon begins long before she ever meets David Martinez. As a child, Lucy was recruited by Arasaka Corporation, along with dozens of other kids who showed exceptional aptitude for net running. These weren't just random children off the street. These were specifically chosen individuals whose minds could interface with cyberspace in ways that most people simply couldn't handle. The corporate propaganda was intoxicating. Arasaka told these kids they were special, that they were going to serve the world's most powerful megacorporation, that they were destined for greatness. For children who likely came from poverty and broken homes, this promise of purpose and belonging would have seemed like salvation itself. They endured brutal training, pushing their young minds to the absolute limit, sustained by the belief that their suffering had meaning. But here's where the corporate dream became a nightmare. Once their training was complete, Arasaka shoved these children underground, forcing them to scour the depths of the old net in search of valuable data and corporate secrets. One by one, Lucy watched her fellow trainees break down under the psychological pressure. Some went insane from prolonged exposure to hostile ICE programs. Others simply burned out, their minds fried by the constant neural strain. Lucy was the sole survivor of this corporate child abuse program. She escaped, but she carried with her the trauma of watching everyone she'd grown up with die in service to Arasaka's greed. This experience fundamentally shaped how Lucy viewed the world. Trust became a luxury she couldn't afford. Genuine connection felt impossible when everyone around her seemed disposable. When Lucy finally made it to Night City, she discovered the perfect place to disappear. In a city full of broken dreams and forgotten faces, one more traumatized runaway could blend into the background without anyone asking uncomfortable questions. She developed an almost supernatural ability to remain anonymous despite her distinctive appearance. Pink hair and chrome might stand out anywhere else, but in Night City, everyone was trying to be someone else. This is when the moon entered Lucy's story as more than just a celestial body. It became her symbol of ultimate escape. The moon represented everything that Night City wasn't. It was clean, quiet, peaceful, and most importantly, it was impossibly far away from Arasaka's reach. When you've spent your childhood as a corporate slave, the idea of going somewhere that mega corporations literally cannot follow you becomes the ultimate fantasy. But here's what makes Lucy's character so complex. The moon wasn't really about the moon at all. It was about the feeling of safety, the possibility of peace, the hope that somewhere in the universe there existed a place where she could finally stop running. The lunar surface became her mental refuge, the one dream that Arasaka's conditioning couldn't touch because it was so completely removed from their world of corporate warfare and digital manipulation. Lucy's life as an edgerunner in Night City was exhausting in ways that went far beyond physical danger. Every job carried the risk of being recognized. Every client could potentially be an Arasaka asset. Every neural interface session might be the one where her former employers finally tracked her down. She lived in constant fear of being dragged back to that underground facility, of being turned back into a tool for corporate ambitions. The mercenary work was necessary but soul-crushing. Lucy couldn't take legitimate employment because that would create digital paper trails that Arasaka could follow. She couldn't form lasting relationships because getting close to people meant risking their safety if her past ever caught up with her. She couldn't even use her real name or maintain a consistent identity for too long. Every aspect of her existence was carefully calculated to avoid detection. By the time we meet Lucy in the series, she's been living this paranoid, isolated lifestyle for years. The constant stress had worn her down to the point where even her childhood dream of reaching the moon seemed more like a desperate fantasy than an achievable goal. She was going through the motions of survival, but the spark of hope that had kept her alive during those early days of freedom was starting to fade. This is the psychological state Lucy was in when David Martinez literally crashed into her life. She wasn't looking for romance or friendship or any kind of meaningful connection. She was just trying to make it through another day without being discovered by the people who had destroyed her childhood. Her initial interest in David was purely professional, just another mark in another job for Maine's crew. But David represented something Lucy hadn't encountered in years: genuine innocence, real kindness, honest emotion in a world built on deception and exploitation. When David talked about the pressure of living up to his mother's expectations, Lucy recognized something of herself in his struggle. Here was someone else who understood what it meant to carry the weight of other people's dreams, even if his situation was far less extreme than her own corporate nightmare. The moment when Lucy shares her moon fantasy with David in that braindance simulation represents the first time in years that she allowed herself to be genuinely vulnerable with another person. She's not just showing him a pretty virtual landscape. She's revealing the deepest part of her psyche, the one untainted dream that had kept her sane through years of trauma and isolation. What makes this scene so powerful is that we can see Lucy being authentically herself for perhaps the first time in the entire series. The mask of cynical professionalism drops away, and we glimpse the person she might have been if Arasaka hadn't stolen her childhood. She's playful, enthusiastic, genuinely happy in a way that seems almost foreign to her usual guarded demeanor. But even as Lucy shares this intimate moment with David, the seeds of her greatest fear are already taking root, because now she has something to lose again. Now there's someone whose safety matters more to her than her own survival. The moon was supposed to be her solitary escape, her private refuge from a world that had repeatedly betrayed her trust. David's presence transforms the meaning of that lunar fantasy entirely. Suddenly, the moon isn't just about getting away from everything. It's about having somewhere to go with someone who matters. The dream evolves from escape to shared adventure, from isolation to connection. But this transformation also makes the dream infinitely more fragile, because now it depends not just on Lucy's survival, but on David's as well. This shift in Lucy's emotional landscape sets up the central tragedy of her character arc. For the first time since her escape from Arasaka, she has something worth protecting that goes beyond mere survival. But her methods of protection, shaped by years of paranoia and trauma, will ultimately become the very forces that destroy what she's trying to save. The irony is devastating when you really think about it. Lucy spent years dreaming of the moon as her ultimate destination, the one place where she could finally be free from the nightmares of her past. But when she finally makes it there at the end of the series, she discovers that freedom without love is just another kind of prison. The moon that was supposed to represent her greatest triumph becomes the stage for her most profound loss. The transformation of Lucy's relationship with David reveals the cruel mathematics of love in Night City. When you've spent years building emotional walls thick enough to keep out corporate assassins and neural hackers, opening your heart becomes an act of extraordinary vulnerability. Lucy understood this better than anyone, which is why her growing attachment to David terrified her on levels she couldn't fully articulate. David represented everything that Night City typically destroys within its first few months: his optimism, his genuine desire to help others, his belief that individual actions could make a meaningful difference in the world. These weren't just personality traits to Lucy. They were precious, fragile qualities that she recognized from her own childhood, before Arasaka's conditioning programs had systematically stripped away her capacity for trust and wonder. The deeper Lucy fell for David, the more desperately she wanted to protect him from the forces that had shaped her own life. But protection, in Lucy's world, meant information control. It meant making decisions for other people without their consent. It meant using the same manipulative tactics that had been used against her, justified by the belief that the ends would somehow redeem the means. This is where Lucy's character becomes truly complex, because her love for David gradually transforms her into the very thing she had spent years running from. She begins operating like a corporate handler, managing David's access to information, making strategic decisions about what he needs to know and when he needs to know it. The tools of her oppression become the tools of her protection, and she doesn't even realize it's happening. When Lucy discovers that Arasaka has identified David as a person of interest, her entire world shifts on its axis. The nightmare she had been running from for years suddenly has a direct line to the one person who had made her life worth living. The moon, which had always been her escape plan, now becomes something she might have to reach alone, because keeping David safe might require sacrificing their relationship entirely. The psychological warfare Lucy wages against herself during this period is heartbreaking to witness. She loves David enough to want him far away from the dangers of Edgerunner life, but she also understands that asking him to abandon his chosen path would be asking him to abandon the very qualities that made her fall in love with him in the first place. His courage, his determination to make a difference, his refusal to accept powerlessness in the face of corporate oppression. Lucy's decision to work behind the scenes, eliminating threats to David without his knowledge, represents her attempt to have it both ways. She wants to keep him safe while allowing him to remain the person she loves. But this approach requires her to become someone she doesn't recognize, someone who lies to the people she cares about, someone who makes life and death decisions based on incomplete information and personal fear. The netrunners she kills aren't just random corporate assets. They're people like her, individuals who had probably made their own compromises with survival, who might have had their own dreams and fears and loved ones. But Lucy's love for David has become so consuming that she's willing to sacrifice anyone and anything that threatens his safety. The girl who had once been a victim of corporate dehumanization now finds herself treating other human beings as obstacles to be eliminated. This moral transformation is what makes Lucy's character arc so devastating. She doesn't become a monster through malice or greed or power hunger. She becomes someone she doesn't recognize through love, through the desperate desire to protect the one good thing that had ever happened to her. The very emotion that had redeemed her humanity gradually strips that humanity away, one compromised decision at a time. The cruel irony is that David might have been able to handle the truth about Arasaka's interest in him, might have been willing to work with Lucy to find a solution that didn't require secrecy and violence. But Lucy's trauma had taught her that information was a weapon, that knowledge was dangerous, that the only way to protect someone was to control their understanding of reality. Her past had trained her to think like a corporate operative, even when she was trying to rebel against corporate power. When Faraday and Kiwi finally corner Lucy, when her secret campaign finally collapses under its own contradictions, the consequences extend far beyond her personal safety. David discovers not just that she had been lying to him, but that she had been making decisions about his life without his consent, that she had been treating him like a child who couldn't handle adult realities. The trust between them, which had been the foundation of everything good in both their lives, crumbles in a matter of hours. But here's the thing that makes this betrayal even more tragic. Lucy hadn't been wrong about the dangers David faced. Her assessment of the threats was accurate. Her understanding of Arasaka's capabilities was based on bitter personal experience. Her fear for his safety was completely justified. She had been right about almost everything except the one thing that mattered most. She had been wrong about David's right to make his own choices, even dangerous ones. The final act of Edgerunners transforms Lucy from an active participant in her own story into a helpless observer of forces beyond her control. Everything she had feared comes to pass, but not because she failed to act. Her worst nightmares become reality precisely because she had acted, because her attempts at protection had created the very circumstances that made David's destruction inevitable. When David puts on the cyberskeleton to save her from Arasaka, Lucy experiences the ultimate cruel irony. The person she had tried so desperately to protect is now sacrificing himself to protect her. All her careful planning, all her secret operations, all her moral compromises had led to this moment where the roles are completely reversed. She becomes the one who needs saving, while David becomes the one paying the price for her choices. The conversation they share in those final moments, floating in the sky with the moon visible in the distance, reveals the fundamental miscommunication that had defined their entire relationship. David believes Lucy's dream is about reaching the lunar surface, about achieving the escape she had always talked about. He doesn't understand that her dream had evolved, that the moon had stopped being a destination and had become a metaphor for the life they might have built together. Lucy tries to tell him, tries to explain that her real dream is standing right there in front of her, dying by degrees as the cyberskeleton burns through his nervous system. But David is too far gone, too consumed by his own sense of responsibility and guilt to hear what she's really saying. He makes her promise to go to the moon because he thinks that's what she wants, because he believes that's what will make her happy. And Lucy, faced with the choice between breaking a dying man's heart and accepting a future that she knows will be hollow and meaningless, chooses love over honesty. She promises David she'll go to the moon, even though she understands that reaching that destination without him will be the cruelest possible victory. She gives him the comfort of believing that his sacrifice will give her everything she ever wanted, even though they both know it isn't true. The final scene of the series, with Lucy alone on the lunar surface, represents the completion of her character's tragic arc. She had achieved her childhood dream through the sacrifice of her adult happiness. She had reached the moon, but only by losing the person who had given that destination meaning. The escape she had fantasized about for years becomes a prison of memory and regret. But there's something even more devastating about Lucy's lunar exile than simple loneliness. She's not just mourning David's death. She's living with the knowledge that her own actions had contributed to the circumstances that killed him. Every decision she made to protect him, every secret she kept, every person she eliminated to ensure his safety had somehow led to this moment where he dies saving her from consequences of her own choices. Susu, the memories she experiences on the moon aren't random flashbacks. They're specifically focused on the early days of her relationship with David, before fear and love had transformed her into someone she didn't recognize. She remembers the person she had been when the future still seemed full of possibilities, when love felt like salvation rather than a source of existential terror. This is why Lucy's ending is so much more complex than a simple tale of dreams fulfilled. She hadn't just lost her boyfriend, she had discovered that the very thing she thought she wanted most in the world was meaningless without the context that had given it significance. The moon was beautiful, but it was also empty, sterile, devoid of the warmth and chaos and unpredictable joy that David had brought into her life. The tragedy deepens when we consider what the moon actually represents in the broader context of Cyberpunk's world. In a universe where megacorporations have carved up Earth into economic zones, where every piece of habitable land serves some corporate interest, the moon stands as the ultimate symbol of freedom from terrestrial power structures. It's the one place where Arasaka's influence theoretically cannot reach, where the rules of Night City don't apply. But here's what makes Lucy's story so brilliantly cruel. The moon isn't actually free from corporate influence. By the time Lucy reaches the lunar surface, we know that space colonization has become just another corporate venture. The very rocket that carries her there, the infrastructure that supports lunar habitation, the economic systems that make space travel possible, all of these exist because corporations found ways to monetize humanity's expansion beyond Earth. Lucy's escape to the moon represents the ultimate hollow victory. She's traded one form of corporate control for another, one kind of isolation for another. The difference is that her new prison is decorated with the aesthetic of freedom, wrapped in the romantic notion of space exploration and human achievement. She's still trapped, but now she's trapped somewhere that looks like paradise. The psychological impact of this realization cannot be overstated. Lucy spent years building her identity around the idea that reaching the moon would solve her fundamental problems. It would put her beyond Arasaka's reach, beyond the violence of Night City, beyond the constant fear that had shaped every decision since her childhood. But sitting alone on that lunar surface, she discovers that geography cannot heal psychological wounds. The memories that flood back to her during those final moments aren't just nostalgic reminiscences. They're her mind's desperate attempt to find some meaning in her current situation, to justify the enormous cost of achieving her supposed dream. She remembers David's enthusiasm when she first showed him the moon simulation, his genuine excitement about the possibility of adventure and exploration. What destroys her isn't just the absence of David, it's the recognition that David had never really understood what the moon meant to her in the first place. He saw it as an adventure, a destination, a goal to be achieved. She had tried to use it as a metaphor for the life they could build together, but that metaphor had been lost in translation. They had been talking about the same thing using completely different languages of meaning. This miscommunication reflects a broader theme about the impossibility of truly knowing another person. David and Lucy loved each other deeply, but they never quite managed to understand each other completely. David's heroic nature made him assume that Lucy's problems could be solved through action and achievement. Lucy's traumatic past made her assume that love required protection through control and secrecy. Neither of them was wrong exactly, but neither of them was entirely right either. David's approach to love was generous, but naive. Lucy's approach was protective, but ultimately destructive. They were both trying to save each other, using methods that made salvation impossible. It's a perfect example of how good intentions can create devastating outcomes when they're filtered through incompatible worldviews. The visual symbolism of Lucy's final scene reinforces this theme of beautiful emptiness. The moon is gorgeous, ethereal, peaceful in ways that Night City never was. The earth hangs in the black sky like a blue marble, distant and untouchable. But there's no life here, no spontaneity, no possibility for growth or change or surprise. It's a museum exhibit of Lucy's former dreams, preserved in vacuum and silence. Lucy's tears in this scene aren't just grief. They're the physical manifestation of understanding, the moment when she finally grasps the true cost of getting everything she thought she wanted. She had spent so much energy running toward the moon that she never stopped to ask herself what she would do once she arrived. The destination had become so important that she forgot to consider whether the journey was taking her in the right direction. But there's another layer to this tragedy that makes it even more devastating. Lucy's presence on the moon represents the fulfillment of David's dying wish, not her own. She's not there because she chose to be there. She's there because a dying man asked her to promise him she would go, and she loved him too much to deny him that final comfort. Her greatest achievement is actually her greatest act of sacrifice. This transforms the entire meaning of the scene. Lucy isn't experiencing the triumph of a dream fulfilled. She's performing the role of someone who achieved their dream, maintaining a fiction for the sake of honoring David's memory. She's become an actress playing herself, going through the motions of happiness and satisfaction while experiencing the opposite of both. The cruelty of this situation extends beyond personal tragedy into the realm of existential horror. Lucy has become trapped in a performance of her own life, forced to pretend that David's understanding of her dreams was accurate because admitting otherwise would mean acknowledging that his sacrifice was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. She can never be honest about her true feelings without dishonoring his memory. This is why the moon becomes a monument to miscommunication rather than a symbol of achievement. Every beautiful vista, every peaceful moment, every instance of the freedom she thought she wanted serves as a reminder of the conversation she and David never quite managed to have. They loved each other deeply, but they never learned to speak the same emotional language. The technological aspects of Lucy's situation add another dimension to her isolation. As a netrunner, she's accustomed to connecting with others through digital interfaces, sharing experiences through braindance technology, communicating across vast distances through cyberspace. But on the moon, these technologies become reminders of everything she's lost rather than tools for connection. She can access her memories of David through her neural implants, but those memories are static recordings rather than living interactions. She can replay their time together endlessly, but she cannot change the ending or add new experiences to the archive. Her technological augmentations, which had once been tools of liberation, now become instruments of torment. The braindance's sequences she experiences aren't just flashbacks. They're her mind's attempt to live in the past because the present has become unbearable and the future seems impossible to imagine. She's trapped in a loop of memory and regret, unable to move forward, but unwilling to let go of what she's lost. It's a kind of digital purgatory, sustained by technology, but defined by human emotion. Lucy's story becomes even more tragic when we consider what might have happened if she had made different choices. If she had trusted David with the truth about Arasaka's interest in him. If she had been willing to share her fears instead of trying to manage them alone, if she had understood that love sometimes requires accepting the possibility of loss rather than trying to prevent it at all costs. But these alternative scenarios miss the point of Lucy's character. She couldn't have made different choices because her choices were shaped by trauma that ran deeper than conscious decision-making. Her childhood experience with Arasaka hadn't just taught her to be suspicious of corporate power. It had taught her that information was dangerous, that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, that survival required constant vigilance and emotional distance. The tragedy of Lucy's character isn't that she made bad decisions. The tragedy is that her past had programmed her to make decisions that felt necessary in the moment, but created long-term consequences she couldn't anticipate. She was fighting a war against enemies that existed both in the external world and in her own psyche, and victory in one arena guaranteed defeat in the other. When we see Lucy floating above the lunar surface in those final moments, we're witnessing the end result of a character arc that began years before the series started. Every choice she made, from her escape from Arasaka to her decision to hide the truth from David, was shaped by trauma and fear and love in equal measure. She was simultaneously the hero and the villain of her own story, the person trying to save herself and the person preventing that salvation from being possible. The moon in this context becomes a perfect metaphor for the gap between what we think we want and what actually makes us happy. Lucy had convinced herself that reaching the lunar surface would solve her fundamental problems, but she discovered too late that her problems weren't geographical. They were psychological, emotional, relational. They required healing rather than escape, connection rather than isolation, trust rather than control. This realization doesn't diminish Lucy's character. If anything, it makes her more human, more relatable, more tragic in the classical sense. She's not a villain who gets what she deserves, or a hero who achieves triumphant victory. She's a person whose good intentions and understandable fears created a situation where winning and losing became indistinguishable from each other. The final image of Lucy alone on the moon will haunt viewers long after the credits roll because it captures something essential about the human condition. We all have dreams that we think will save us, goals that we believe will make everything better, destinations that represent freedom from our current problems. But Lucy's story reminds us that the things we think we want and the things that actually make us happy are often completely different. Her tears aren't just about losing David. They're about discovering that she had been wrong about herself, wrong about what mattered, wrong about what would bring her peace. The moon that was supposed to represent her ultimate triumph becomes the stage for her most profound recognition of loss. She had achieved everything she thought she wanted and discovered that none of it meant anything without the person who had made her dreams worth pursuing in the first place. But the most devastating aspect of Lucy's lunar prison isn't the isolation or even the hollow victory of achieving a meaningless dream. It's the knowledge that she carries David's final misunderstanding with her forever. His dying wish wasn't based on what she actually wanted, but on what he thought she wanted. And now she's trapped in the performance of fulfilling that wish, unable to honor his memory without betraying her own truth. This creates a psychological paradox that defines Lucy's existence in those final moments. Every breath she takes on the lunar surface is simultaneously an act of love and an act of self-destruction. She's honoring David's sacrifice by going where he believed she belonged, while simultaneously punishing herself by accepting exile from everything that actually gave her life meaning. The braindance memories that flood through her consciousness during this scene aren't random nostalgia. They're her mind desperately searching for evidence that her current situation makes sense, that the cost was worth paying, that somewhere in her shared history with David, there exists justification for this outcome. But the memories that surface are specifically from the early days of their relationship, before fear transformed love into something unrecognizable. She remembers David's wonder when she first shared the lunar simulation with him, his genuine excitement about the possibility of adventure beyond Earth's atmosphere. But now she understands that David's enthusiasm was never really about the moon itself. It was about sharing an experience with her, about being part of her dreams and aspirations. The destination was never the point for him. The connection was what mattered. This realization hits Lucy like a physical blow because it reveals the fundamental tragedy of their entire relationship. They had been using the same words to describe completely different concepts. When David talked about taking her to the moon, he was talking about adventure and shared experience. When Lucy talked about the moon, she was talking about escape and safety. Neither of them realized they were speaking different emotional languages until it was too late to learn translation. The technological infrastructure that surrounds Lucy on the lunar base serves as a constant reminder of corporate influence extending even into her supposed sanctuary. Every piece of equipment, every life support system, every communication device bears the subtle marking of megacorporate manufacturing. She escaped Arasaka's direct control only to find herself dependent on systems created by their competitors and allies. This corporate omnipresence transforms the moon from a symbol of freedom into a demonstration of capitalism's ability to colonize even humanity's most ambitious dreams. The same economic forces that turned Night City into a corporate battleground have now extended their reach beyond Earth's atmosphere. There is no escape from the system that destroyed her childhood because that system has grown large enough to encompass multiple worlds. Lucy's Netrunner training allows her to perceive these corporate networks in ways that ordinary people cannot. Her enhanced vision can see the digital infrastructure that connects lunar facilities to Earth-based servers, the data streams that flow between corporate headquarters and off-world installations. She's not just physically isolated on the moon, she's digitally surrounded by the same corporate architecture she spent years trying to escape. The cruel irony becomes complete when we realize that Lucy's presence on the moon actually serves corporate interests in ways she probably doesn't fully understand. Her survival and apparent success provide propaganda value for the space colonization programs that companies are trying to promote. She becomes an unwitting advertisement for the very system she was trying to escape. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Lucy's situation is how it transforms her relationship with memory itself. The braindance technology that allows her to relive her experiences with David also traps her in an endless loop of what-if scenarios and alternate possibilities. She can replay their conversations, but she cannot change the outcomes. She can experience their happiness again, but only as a recording rather than a living reality. This technological torment reflects the broader theme of how advanced cybernetics can amplify human suffering rather than alleviating it. Lucy's enhanced memory doesn't help her heal from trauma. It preserves that trauma in perfect digital clarity, making forgetting impossible and moving forward nearly unthinkable. Her augmentations become instruments of self-torture rather than tools of empowerment. The visual contrast between the sterile beauty of the lunar landscape and the chaotic vibrancy of Night City reinforces the emptiness of Lucy's achievement. Night City was violent, corrupt, and dangerous, but it was also alive in ways that the moon can never be. The neon lights, the crowded streets, the constant noise and motion created an environment where change was always possible, where tomorrow might bring something unexpected. The moon offers none of that possibility. It's beautiful but static, peaceful but dead, safe but ultimately meaningless. Lucy traded the dangerous vitality of Earth for the secure emptiness of space, and only after making that trade does she realize what she's lost. She's achieved perfect safety at the cost of everything that made life worth protecting. The memories that surface during her lunar exile focus specifically on moments of spontaneity and surprise in her relationship with David. His unexpected kindness when they first met, his willingness to trust her despite her obvious secrets, his ability to make her laugh even in dangerous situations. These weren't moments she could have planned or controlled, and that's exactly what made them precious. Now, surrounded by the predictable perfection of the lunar environment, Lucy understands that spontaneity and surprise were exactly what she had been trying to eliminate from her life through her protective manipulation of David's circumstances. She had been so afraid of losing him to unpredictable dangers that she had systematically removed the unpredictability that made their relationship meaningful in the first place. The communication delay between Earth and Moon serves as a perfect metaphor for the emotional distance that had grown between Lucy and David during their final months together. Just as radio signals take time to travel between worlds, their emotional signals had been taking longer and longer to reach each other. By the time Lucy realized what she was losing, the distance had become too great to bridge. This temporal displacement also means that any news Lucy receives from Earth is already outdated by the time it reaches her. She's living in the past in more ways than one, receiving information about a world that has already moved beyond the events she's learning about. Her isolation isn't just spatial, it's temporal, cutting her off from the flow of history itself. The Earth that hangs in the lunar sky serves as a constant reminder of everything Lucy has abandoned. It's close enough to see in detail, but far enough away to be completely unreachable. The blue marble that represents home becomes a form of torture, beautiful but untouchable, familiar but forever beyond her grasp. Lucy's technical expertise as a netrunner means she could probably find ways to return to Earth if she really wanted to. She has the skills to manipulate transportation systems, to forge the necessary documentation, to bypass the security measures that might prevent unauthorized return trips. But she doesn't attempt any of these options because returning would mean admitting that David's dying wish was based on a misunderstanding. This creates another layer of psychological imprisonment. Lucy isn't trapped on the moon by external forces. She's trapped by her own loyalty to a dead man's misconception about what would make her happy. Her love for David has become the bars of her cage, and she holds the key but cannot bring herself to use it. The routine that Lucy establishes on the lunar base reflects her attempt to create meaning in a meaningless situation. She maintains the equipment, monitors the communication systems, performs the daily tasks necessary for survival. But these activities are hollow rituals rather than purposeful work. She's going through the motions of living while experiencing the opposite of life. The contrast between Lucy's technical competence and her emotional devastation highlights the central theme of Cyberpunk's universe. Advanced technology can solve almost any practical problem, but it cannot address the fundamental human need for connection and meaning. Lucy has access to life support systems that can keep her alive indefinitely, but she has no access to the relationships that made life worth living. Her net-running skills, which had once been tools of liberation and survival, now serve mainly to torture her with information about the world she's abandoned. She can hack into Earth's communication networks and watch other people living the kinds of lives she gave up. She can observe the ongoing conflicts in Night City, the corporate wars that continue without her participation, the cycle of violence and exploitation that she once fought against. But this digital voyeurism only emphasizes her isolation. She's become a ghost, haunting the networks of a world she can no longer touch, watching life happen to other people while experiencing none of it herself. Her consciousness exists in cyberspace, but her body is trapped in the physical emptiness of the lunar surface. The food she eats, the air she breathes, the water she drinks, all come from recycled corporate systems designed to sustain human life in hostile environments. Every meal reminds her of her dependence on the same industrial infrastructure she spent years trying to escape. Every breath is a reminder that her survival depends on corporations she despises. This physical dependence mirrors the psychological dependence that defines her entire situation. She's dependent on David's memory to justify her presence on the moon, dependent on corporate technology to stay alive, dependent on Earth-based communication systems to maintain any connection to human civilization. Her supposed independence is revealed to be the most complete form of dependence imaginable. The lunar day-night cycle, which lasts roughly 28 Earth days, creates a temporal rhythm that has nothing to do with human biological needs. Lucy's circadian rhythms, evolved for Earth's 24-hour cycle, are constantly disrupted by the alien schedule of her new environment. Even her body rebels against the achievement of her supposed dreams. Sleep becomes another form of torture because her dreams are filled with memories of David and visions of the life they might have built together. Waking offers no relief because it returns her to the reality of her isolation. She's trapped between a past she cannot change and a future she cannot imagine, suspended in a present that feels more like purgatory than paradise. The exercise equipment in the lunar facility serves a purely functional purpose, maintaining her physical health in the low-gravity environment. But the act of running on a treadmill while staring at the Earth through a viewport becomes a perfect metaphor for her psychological state. She's moving constantly, but going nowhere, expending energy without achieving progress, maintaining the appearance of activity while experiencing complete stagnation. Lucy's situation transforms the very concept of success into something horrifying. She has achieved everything she claimed to want, but that achievement has cost her everything that actually mattered. Her story becomes a cautionary tale about the danger of pursuing goals without understanding the deeper needs they're supposed to fulfill. The communication logs from the lunar facility reveal the bureaucratic indifference of the corporate systems that maintain her exile. Her status reports are filed automatically. Her supply requests are processed by algorithms. Her existence is reduced to data points in corporate spreadsheets. She has become a statistic in someone else's quarterly report, a line item in a budget for off-world operations. This bureaucratic dehumanization completes the circle that began with her childhood exploitation by Arasaka. She escaped corporate slavery only to achieve corporate irrelevance. She's no longer valuable enough to exploit, but she's also too isolated to matter. Her rebellion against corporate power has ended with her complete removal from any sphere where corporate power operates. The irony cuts deeper when we realize that Lucy's presence on the moon actually validates corporate narratives about space colonization and human expansion beyond Earth. Her survival proves that the technology works, that people can adapt to off-world environments, that the corporate investment in space infrastructure was justified. She becomes unwitting propaganda for the very system she was trying to escape. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of Lucy's situation is how it transforms love itself into a source of suffering. Her love for David, which had once been the most beautiful thing in her life, now becomes the chain that binds her to this empty achievement. Every moment of happiness she remembers makes her current isolation more painful. Every memory of connection emphasizes her current loneliness. The moon that was supposed to represent freedom has become the ultimate prison, beautiful but empty, safe but meaningless, peaceful but ultimately lifeless. Lucy has achieved her childhood dream only to discover that childhood dreams, when pursued without growth or understanding, can become adult nightmares. And so she floats there, suspended between earth and stars, carrying the weight of a love that transformed into loss, a dream that became a nightmare, a victory that feels exactly like defeat. The tears that fall in the low gravity of the lunar surface carry with them the salt of every choice she made, every secret she kept, every moment when she chose fear over trust and protection over connection. The moon bears witness to her grief, silent and eternal, offering no judgment but also no comfort. It simply exists, as beautiful and empty as the dream that brought her there, as cold and distant as the future that stretches ahead of her, unmarked by possibility or hope. The weight of Lucy's realization settles over her like lunar dust, fine and pervasive and impossible to brush away. She understands now that David's final request wasn't an act of love in the way she had tried to convince herself. It was an act of projection, a dying man's attempt to impose meaning on a situation that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. David believed he was giving her everything she had ever wanted because he never truly grasped what she actually needed. The moon had always been her metaphor for escape, but escape from what? From loneliness, from fear, from the constant threat of being discovered and dragged back into corporate servitude. The lunar surface couldn't provide any of those things, because the problems she was running from existed inside her own mind. This psychological revelation transforms Lucy's understanding of her entire journey. Every choice she had made, from her initial escape from Arasaka to her final promise to David, had been driven by the same fundamental misunderstanding that now defined her exile. She had spent so many years running towards something she thought she wanted that she never stopped to examine whether that thing would actually solve her real problems. The braindance recordings of her time with David take on new meaning in this context. They're not just memories of happiness, they're evidence of the person she had been when she stopped running, when she allowed herself to exist in the present moment, instead of constantly planning her next escape. Those recordings capture the only period of her adult life when the moon had stopped being a destination and had started being irrelevant. But recognizing this truth doesn't diminish her grief. If anything, it makes her loss more profound because she understands now that David had died trying to give her something she didn't actually want. His sacrifice was genuine, his love was real, but his understanding of her deepest needs was fatally incomplete. He gave his life to secure her freedom, never realizing that her freedom was meaningless without him to share it. The technological systems that surround Lucy on the lunar base begin to feel less like life support and more like life preservation. The difference is subtle but crucial. Life support implies the possibility of growth, change, eventual return to full living. Life preservation is about maintaining biological functions without regard for psychological health or emotional fulfillment. She's being kept alive, but she's not really living. This distinction becomes more apparent as Lucy establishes routines that serve no purpose beyond filling time. She monitors communication channels that carry no messages for her. She maintains equipment that requires no maintenance. She performs daily exercises that keep her body healthy for a future she cannot imagine wanting. Every action is technically correct, but spiritually hollow. The earth that dominates the lunar sky begins to change meaning for Lucy as well. Initially, it had represented everything she was escaping from: the corporate wars, the violence of Night City, the constant threat of discovery and recapture. But now that same blue marble represents everything she had given up. The chaos and unpredictability that made life dangerous also made it worth living. She finds herself studying the cloud patterns that swirl across Earth's surface, trying to identify the weather systems that might be affecting Night City at any given moment. Is it raining on the apartment where she and David had shared those quiet moments between jobs? Are the neon signs reflecting off wet pavement the way they did that night when David first told her he loved her? These questions torture her because they can never be answered. The communication delay between Earth and Moon means that by the time she receives any information about conditions on Earth, those conditions have already changed. She's forever trapped in the past, receiving outdated news about a world that has moved beyond the moment she's learning about. Lucy's net-running skills become both blessing and curse in this environment. Her ability to hack into Earth's communication networks provides her with access to information about the ongoing conflicts and developments she's missed. But this digital voyeurism only emphasizes her disconnection from the world she once tried to change. She watches news feeds about corporate wars escalating in Night City, about new technological developments that make her own cybernetic enhancements seem outdated, about the lives and deaths of people she once knew. But watching these events unfold through stolen data streams makes her feel less like a participant in human civilization and more like an anthropologist studying a species she no longer belongs to. The routine maintenance tasks required to keep the lunar facility operational provide Lucy with something approaching purpose, but even these activities remind her of her fundamental isolation. Every repair she makes, every system she optimizes, every problem she solves serves only to extend her own exile. Her technical competence has become an instrument of self-imprisonment. The food production systems on the lunar base represent another form of corporate dependency that Lucy cannot escape. Every meal she eats comes from hydroponic systems designed by the same megacorporations she spent years fighting against. The water she drinks has been recycled through filters manufactured by companies that view human life as a resource to be managed rather than a reality to be respected. This physical dependence on corporate technology mirrors the psychological dependence that defines her entire situation. She depends on David's memory to justify her presence on the moon, on corporate systems to stay alive, on Earth-based communication networks to maintain any connection to human civilization. Her supposed independence is revealed as the most complete form of dependence imaginable. The lunar day-night cycle, lasting roughly 28 Earth days, creates a temporal rhythm that has nothing to do with human biological needs. Lucy's circadian rhythms, evolved for Earth's 24-hour cycle, are constantly disrupted by the alien schedule of her new environment. Even her body rebels against the achievement of her supposed dreams. Sleep becomes another form of psychological warfare because her dreams are filled with memories of David and visions of the life they might have built together. Waking offers no relief because it returns her to the reality of her isolation. She exists in a state of perpetual temporal displacement, trapped between a past she cannot change and a future she cannot imagine. The exercise equipment in the lunar facility serves a purely functional purpose, maintaining her physical health in the low-gravity environment. But the act of running on a treadmill while staring at Earth through a reinforced viewport becomes a perfect metaphor for her psychological state. She's moving constantly, but going nowhere, expending energy without achieving progress, maintaining the appearance of activity while experiencing complete stagnation. Lucy's situation transforms the very concept of success into something horrifying. She has achieved everything she claimed to want, but that achievement has cost her everything that actually mattered. Her story becomes a meditation on the danger of pursuing goals without understanding the deeper needs they're supposed to fulfill. The communication logs from the lunar facility reveal the bureaucratic indifference of the corporate systems that maintain her exile. Her status reports are filed automatically. Her supply requests are processed by algorithms. Her existence is reduced to data points in corporate spreadsheets. She has become a statistic in someone else's quarterly report, a line item in a budget for off-world operations. This bureaucratic dehumanization completes a circle that began with her childhood exploitation by Arasaka. She escaped corporate slavery only to achieve corporate irrelevance. She's no longer valuable enough to exploit, but she's also too isolated to matter. Her rebellion against corporate power has ended with her complete removal from any sphere where corporate power operates. The irony cuts deeper when Lucy realizes that her presence on the moon actually validates corporate narratives about space colonization and human expansion beyond Earth. Her survival proves that the technology works, that people can adapt to off-world environments, that the corporate investment in space infrastructure was justified. She has become unwitting propaganda for the very system she was trying to escape. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of Lucy's situation is how it transforms love itself into a source of suffering. Her love for David, which had once been the most beautiful thing in her life, now becomes the chain that binds her to this empty achievement. Every moment of happiness she remembers makes her current isolation more painful. Every memory of connection emphasizes her current loneliness. The technical manuals and operational procedures that fill the lunar facility's database become Lucy's only reading material, and even these corporate documents carry reminders of the world she's abandoned. The safety protocols reference emergency evacuation procedures back to Earth. The maintenance schedules assume regular supply shipments and personnel rotations that will never come for her. Lucy begins to understand that her exile isn't temporary. There's no plan for her return, no expectation that she'll ever want to leave the moon. The corporate systems that support her presence assume she'll remain there indefinitely, a permanent resident of humanity's most expensive prison. She's achieved the ultimate escape from earthly concerns by trapping herself somewhere that earthly concerns cannot reach. The braindance technology that allows Lucy to relive her memories with David becomes both her greatest comfort and her most refined torture. She can experience their happiness again, but only as recordings rather than living reality. She can replay their conversations, but she cannot change the outcomes or add new experiences to the archive. These technological hauntings reflect the broader theme of how advanced cybernetics can amplify human suffering rather than alleviating it. Lucy's enhanced memory doesn't help her heal from trauma. It preserves that trauma in perfect digital clarity, making forgetting impossible and moving forward nearly unthinkable. Her augmentations have become instruments of self-torture rather than tools of empowerment. The visual contrast between the sterile beauty of the lunar landscape and the chaotic vibrancy of Night City reinforces the emptiness of Lucy's achievement. Night City was violent, corrupt, and dangerous, but it was also alive in ways that the moon can never be. The neon lights, the crowded streets, the constant noise and motion created an environment where change was always possible, where tomorrow might bring something unexpected. The moon offers none of that possibility. It's beautiful but static, peaceful but dead, safe but ultimately meaningless. Lucy has traded the dangerous vitality of Earth for the secure emptiness of space, and only after making that trade does she understand what she's lost. She has achieved perfect safety at the cost of everything that made life worth protecting. The memories that surface during her lunar exile focus specifically on moments of spontaneity and surprise in her relationship with David. His unexpected kindness when they first met, his willingness to trust her despite her obvious secrets, his ability to make her laugh even in dangerous situations. These weren't moments she could have planned or controlled, and that's exactly what made them precious. Now, Surrounded by the predictable perfection of the lunar environment, Lucy understands that spontaneity and surprise were exactly what she had been trying to eliminate from her life through her protective manipulation of David's circumstances. She had been so afraid of losing him to unpredictable dangers that she had systematically removed the unpredictability that made their relationship meaningful in the first place. The communication delay between Earth and Moon serves as a perfect metaphor for the emotional distance that had grown between Lucy and David during their final months together. Just as radio signals take time to travel between worlds, their emotional signals had been taking longer and longer to reach each other. By the time Lucy realized what she was losing, the distance had become too great to bridge. This temporal displacement means that any news Lucy receives from Earth is already outdated by the time it reaches her. She's living in the past in more ways than one, receiving information about a world that has already moved beyond the events she's learning about. Her isolation isn't just spatial, it's temporal, cutting her off from the flow of history itself. Lucy's technical expertise as a netrunner means she could probably find ways to return to Earth if she really wanted to. She has the skills to manipulate transportation systems, to forge necessary documentation, to bypass security measures that might prevent unauthorized return trips. But she doesn't attempt any of these options because returning would mean admitting that David's dying wish was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. This creates another layer of psychological imprisonment. Lucy isn't trapped on the moon by external forces. She's trapped by her own loyalty to a dead man's misconception about what would make her happy. Her love for David has become the bars of her cage, and she holds the key but cannot bring herself to use it. The routine she establishes on the lunar base reflects her attempt to create meaning in a meaningless situation. She maintains equipment that doesn't need maintenance, monitors communication systems that carry no messages for her, performs daily tasks that serve no purpose beyond filling time. These activities are hollow rituals rather than purposeful work. She's going through the motions of living while experiencing the opposite of life. And so, Lucy exists in this state of beautiful torment, surrounded by the achievement of everything she thought she wanted, haunted by the memory of everything that actually mattered. The moon bears witness to her grief, silent and eternal, offering no judgment but also no comfort. It simply exists, as beautiful and empty as the dream that brought her there, as cold and distant as the future that stretches ahead of her, unmarked by hope or possibility. The tears that fall in the low gravity of the lunar surface carry with them the weight of every choice she made, every secret she kept, every moment when she chose fear over trust and protection over connection. They drift slowly downward in the alien gravity, each drop a small monument to the love that saved her and destroyed her in equal measure. Lucy's last wish wasn't really about the moon at all. It was about the life she might have lived, the person she might have been, the happiness she might have found if she had learned to trust instead of protect, to connect instead of control. But that wish, like David himself, exists now only in memory, preserved forever in the digital amber of her enhanced consciousness, beautiful and untouchable and eternally out of reach. The psychological architecture of Lucy's imprisonment extends beyond the physical confines of the lunar facility into realms of consciousness that no corporate engineer ever anticipated. Her enhanced neural interface, originally designed to navigate the treacherous waters of cyberspace, now serves as a gateway to endless loops of digital torment. Each memory she accesses through her braindance implants carries the weight of what could have been, transforming her most precious experiences into instruments of exquisite suffering. The facility's automated systems continue their relentless cycle of maintenance and monitoring, oblivious to the human tragedy unfolding within their sterile corridors. Life support algorithms calculate optimal oxygen levels and temperature settings based on baseline human requirements. But no algorithm exists to measure the suffocation of the soul or the hypothermia of hope. Lucy moves through these mechanized routines like a ghost haunting her own existence, performing the actions necessary for survival while experiencing nothing that resembles actual living. Her daily interactions with the facility's artificial intelligence systems provide a grotesque parody of human conversation. The AI responds to her queries with programmed enthusiasm, offering status reports and system diagnostics with the synthetic cheerfulness of corporate customer service protocols. These conversations become increasingly surreal as Lucy finds herself discussing atmospheric pressure readings and water reclamation efficiency with the only voice she hears for days at a time. The irony becomes suffocating when Lucy realizes that these AI systems understand her technical needs better than David ever understood her emotional ones. The facility's computer can predict when she'll need food, when equipment requires maintenance, when her exercise routine should be modified for optimal health outcomes. But David, the person she loved more than life itself, never quite grasped that her dream of the moon was really a dream of safety, of peace, of a place where love could exist without the constant threat of corporate violence. This recognition doesn't diminish her love for David. Instead, it transforms that love into something more complex and painful. She loves him not despite his failure to understand her completely, but because of his genuine attempt to give her what he believed would make her happy. His final wish wasn't selfish or controlling. It was the last act of someone who loved her enough to sacrifice everything, even if that sacrifice was based on incomplete information. The communication array that connects the lunar facility to Earth becomes Lucy's window into a world that continues to spin without her participation. She monitors news feeds from Night City, watching the eternal cycle of corporate warfare and street violence that had defined her former existence. The players change, but the game remains the same. New Edgerunners rise and fall. New corporate executives climb over the bodies of their predecessors. New technologies emerge to solve problems that previous technologies had created. But watching these events unfold from her lunar exile transforms Lucy's perspective on the life she once lived. The violence that had seemed so immediate and threatening from street level appears almost absurd when viewed from the cold vacuum of space. The corporate executives who had loomed so large in her nightmares are revealed as tiny figures scurrying across the surface of a small blue planet, their ambitions and cruelties dwarfed by the vast indifference of the cosmos. This cosmic perspective should provide comfort, should help her understand that her problems were never as significant as they seemed. Instead, It makes her isolation more profound because it reveals the meaninglessness of everything except the connections between people. The corporate wars that had shaped her life were indeed petty and insignificant, but the love she shared with David was equally small when measured against the universe. And small, she realizes, doesn't mean worthless. It means precious, rare, irreplaceable. The lunar landscape outside the facility windows changes with a rhythm that has nothing to do with human time. Earth rises and sets in slow motion, its phases marking days that feel like months and months that feel like minutes. Lucy's circadian rhythms, evolved for the 24-hour cycle of her home planet, rebel against this alien temporality. Sleep becomes irregular and haunted, waking hours stretch into endless twilight, and time itself becomes another form of imprisonment. She begins to understand why the moon had appealed to her for so long. Its distance from Earth made it seem like a place outside of time, beyond the reach of corporate scheduling and the relentless pace of urban existence. But living outside of time, she discovers, is another way of saying living outside of life itself. Time isn't just a measurement. It's the medium through which relationships grow, experiences accumulate, and meaning emerges from the chaos of existence. The hydroponic gardens that provide fresh food for the facility become Lucy's only connection to the process of growth and change. She tends these plants with obsessive care, monitoring their development with the same precision she once applied to infiltrating corporate data systems. But even this connection to life feels hollow because the plants exist in the same sterile isolation that defines her own existence. They grow in artificial soil under artificial light, sustained by recycled water and manufactured nutrients. These gardens become a metaphor for Lucy's entire situation. She's alive and even healthy, but her existence lacks the unpredictable vitality that makes life meaningful. The plants grow according to programmed schedules, producing fruit and vegetables that taste like shadows of their earthly counterparts. Everything is technically correct, but spiritually empty, functional, but devoid of the chaos and surprise that characterize natural growth. The maintenance robots that service the facility provide Lucy with her only physical company, but their presence emphasizes her isolation rather than alleviating it. These machines perform their tasks with mechanical precision, following programming that allows no variation or creativity. They represent the ultimate expression of corporate efficiency, beings designed to function without consciousness, emotion, or need for connection. Lucy finds herself talking to these robots sometimes, addressing them as if they were capable of conversation or understanding. She knows they cannot respond meaningfully, but the sound of her own voice in the facility's sterile silence becomes necessary for maintaining some connection to her own humanity. These one-sided conversations reveal the depths of her loneliness while demonstrating her desperate need for any form of interaction, even with machines. The robot maintenance schedules become markers of time for Lucy, their predictable patterns providing structure to days that would otherwise blur together in meaningless succession. She learns to anticipate their arrival in different sections of the facility, sometimes adjusting her own activities to coincide with their presence, simply to have the illusion of shared purpose, even if that sharing is entirely one-sided. The technical manuals and operational databases that comprise the facility's library offer Lucy access to vast amounts of information about lunar operations, space technology, and off-world survival techniques. But this knowledge feels abstract and disconnected from any meaningful application. She's learning to become an expert in maintaining systems that serve only to sustain her own exile, acquiring skills that have no purpose beyond extending her imprisonment. These technical documents also reveal the corporate planning that went into her current situation. The facility wasn't designed for permanent habitation by a single individual. The life support systems, the food production capacity, the recreational facilities all assume multiple occupants and regular resupply missions from Earth. Lucy's presence represents an unplanned variation, a single data point that falls outside the parameters of normal operation. Reading between the lines of technical specifications and operational protocols, Lucy begins to understand that her exile wasn't intended to be permanent. The corporate entities that funded lunar development expected regular rotation of personnel, planned obsolescence of equipment, eventual expansion or abandonment of facilities based on economic projections. But her situation exists outside these corporate timelines because it was created by love rather than profit, by human emotion rather than business planning. This realization adds another layer to her psychological torment. She's not just isolated on the moon, she's isolated in a situation that no one anticipated, planned for, or knows how to resolve. The corporate systems that sustain her weren't designed for her specific circumstances, which means they cannot provide solutions to her actual needs. She's trapped not just by distance and loyalty, but by the fundamental incompatibility between human emotional needs and corporate operational parameters. The facility's communication systems allow Lucy to monitor Earth-based networks, but the information she receives feels increasingly irrelevant to her actual circumstances. News about political developments, technological innovations, cultural trends, and social movements reaches her as historical data rather than current events. By the time she learns about anything happening on Earth, that event has already become part of the past. This temporal displacement transforms Lucy's relationship with information itself. As a netrunner, she had been accustomed to accessing data in real time, making decisions based on current conditions, responding to threats and opportunities as they emerged. Now she receives all information as archaeology, learning about events only after they have concluded and their consequences have been determined. The communication logs reveal attempts by various parties to establish contact with the lunar facility, but these messages never reach Lucy directly. Corporate communication protocols route all external contacts through automated systems that respond with standard acknowledgments and status reports. Anyone trying to reach Lucy personally receives only confirmation that the facility is operational and its occupant is alive and healthy. These filtered communications represent another form of corporate control extending into Lucy's exile. Even on the moon, she cannot escape the bureaucratic systems that treat human beings as resources to be managed rather than individuals with agency and needs. The same corporate mentality that had exploited her as a child now manages her as an adult, reducing her existence to data points and status updates. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of these communication logs is the absence of any messages that were actually intended for her personally. No one on Earth knows how to reach her directly. No one understands her current situation well enough to offer meaningful support, and no one possesses the authority or resources to facilitate her return, even if she wanted to come back. The medical monitoring systems built into the facility track Lucy's physical health with obsessive precision, generating detailed reports about her cardiovascular function, neurological activity, and metabolic processes. These systems can detect the slightest deviation from baseline human parameters and recommend adjustments to diet, exercise, or environmental conditions. But they cannot measure loneliness, cannot quantify grief, cannot prescribe treatments for existential despair. Lucy's biometric data tells the story of someone who is technically healthy but spiritually dying. Her physical systems function within normal parameters, while her psychological state deteriorates in ways that no medical sensor can detect. She's experiencing the slow death of hope while maintaining the vital signs of a person in perfect health. The irony becomes complete when Lucy realizes that these medical monitoring systems represent the ultimate expression of corporate care. They ensure her continued survival and operational capacity while remaining completely indifferent to her actual well-being. She's being maintained like a valuable piece of equipment, kept functional for purposes that no one has bothered to define or explain. The exercise equipment in the facility's recreation area becomes another source of psychological torture, disguised as beneficial maintenance. The treadmills, resistance machines, and cardiovascular equipment all function perfectly, providing Lucy with the means to maintain her physical fitness in the low-gravity environment. But exercising alone in a sterile room while staring at the earth through reinforced windows becomes a perfect metaphor for her entire situation. She runs on treadmills that go nowhere while looking at a world she cannot reach. She lifts weights that build strength for tasks she will never perform. She maintains cardiovascular health for adventures she will never experience. Every repetition, every mile, every calorie burned serves only to extend her capacity for an existence that lacks purpose or meaning. The recreational facilities also include entertainment systems loaded with thousands of hours of movies, music, books, and games. But consuming this media becomes another form of voyeurism, watching other people's stories while having no story of her own. The entertainment is designed to distract from boredom and loneliness, but for Lucy, it only emphasizes the difference between experiencing life secondhand and actually living. She finds herself drawn to romantic comedies and adventure films, stories about people who overcome obstacles to find love and purpose and connection. But these narratives feel like taunts rather than entertainment, reminders of possibilities that no longer exist for her. The happy endings that once provided escapism now serve as evidence of everything she has lost. The books in the facility's digital library offer more substantial engagement, requiring active imagination and intellectual participation rather than passive consumption. Lucy loses herself in novels about exploration and discovery, about people who venture into unknown territories and find meaning in the journey itself. But even these stories ultimately return her to the reality of her own situation, where she has achieved the ultimate exploration, only to discover that the territory she sought was empty of everything that mattered. The music collection becomes perhaps the most painful form of entertainment, because songs have the power to transport her instantly back to specific moments with David. A particular melody can trigger complete sensory memories, bringing back not just the sound of his voice, but the warmth of his touch, the scent of his hair, the feeling of safety that came from being held by someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. These musical time travels become so intense that Lucy eventually stops listening to anything that might trigger memories of her former life. The silence that fills the facility becomes preferable to the emotional violence of accidentally encountering a song that reminds her of everything she has lost. But silence brings its own form of torture, emphasizing the absence of David's voice, the lack of conversation, the missing soundscape of shared existence. The facility's observation deck provides the most spectacular view available to human beings, a panoramic vista of space that includes Earth, the stars, and the vast emptiness that surrounds all existence. This view should inspire awe and wonder, should provide perspective on the beauty and mystery of the universe. Instead, it becomes another source of torment, because beauty without someone to share it with feels like mockery. Lucy spends hours staring at Earth through the observation deck's massive windows, trying to identify the continents and weather patterns that might affect Night City. She searches for signs of the life she abandoned, looking for evidence that the world continues to exist and change even without her participation. But the distance that makes these observations possible also makes them meaningless. She can see everything and affect nothing. The stars that surround Earth in the lunar sky represent infinite possibility and absolute impossibility simultaneously. Each point of light marks another world, another potential destination, another place where life might be different and better. But the same technology that brought her to the moon could theoretically carry her to any of these distant worlds, and the prospect fills her with horror rather than excitement, because every destination would be equally empty without David to share the journey. Lucy's understanding of her situation evolves as she spends more time alone with her thoughts and memories. She begins to recognize patterns in her own behavior, to see how her past trauma shaped her responses to David's love, to understand the ways in which her attempts at protection became forms of control. This self-awareness doesn't diminish her grief, but it adds layers of regret and self-recrimination to her emotional landscape. She realizes that David had been trying to tell her things that she wasn't ready to hear, that their relationship might have developed differently if she'd been more willing to trust him with her fears and vulnerabilities. The secrets she kept to protect him had actually prevented the deeper intimacy that might have made their love strong enough to survive the challenges they faced. But these insights come too late to change anything, and their accuracy makes them more painful rather than less. Lucy is forced to live with the knowledge that she contributed to the destruction of the relationship that meant everything to her, that her love for David had been real but flawed, genuine but ultimately destructive. The braindance recordings of her time with David take on new meaning as Lucy's understanding of their relationship deepens. She can see things in these memories that she missed when they were actually happening, can recognize David's attempts to connect with her on levels that she wasn't prepared to accept. The recordings become educational as well as nostalgic, teaching her about love and relationship and communication in ways that can no longer be applied to actual living. These digital memories also reveal the person Lucy had been during the happiest period of her life, and that person seems almost like a stranger to her now. The Lucy who laughed with David, who shared her dreams and fears, who allowed herself to be vulnerable and open and trusting, feels like someone from another lifetime. The isolation and grief of her lunar exile have changed her in fundamental ways that make returning to that earlier version of herself seem impossible. The facility's automated systems continue their cycles of maintenance and monitoring, oblivious to the psychological drama unfolding within their operational parameters. Life support functions optimize themselves based on environmental conditions and occupant biometrics. Food production systems adjust their output based on consumption patterns and nutritional requirements. Communication arrays maintain contact with Earth-based networks according to predetermined schedules. But these systems cannot adapt to Lucy's actual needs because her actual needs fall outside their programming parameters. They can keep her body alive indefinitely, but they cannot address the death of her spirit. They can provide technical solutions to every practical problem while remaining completely useless for the only problem that actually matters. Lucy begins to understand that she has become trapped not just by distance and loyalty, but by the fundamental incompatibility between human emotional needs and the systems designed to sustain human life. The technology that makes her survival possible also makes her recovery impossible because it treats her as a biological system rather than a conscious being with agency and desires and the need for meaningful connection. The moon that was supposed to represent her ultimate freedom has become the stage for her ultimate imprisonment, beautiful and terrible in its perfect fulfillment of everything she thought she wanted and nothing that she actually needed. She floats there in the low gravity of her achieved dreams, weightless and groundless, suspended between the earth she can never return to and the stars she can never reach, carrying within her consciousness the precious and unbearable weight of a love that saved her and destroyed her in equal measure. The corporate documentation stored in the facility's databases reveals the true scope of Lucy's predicament with bureaucratic precision. Every supply manifest, every maintenance schedule, every operational protocol assumes she will remain on the lunar surface indefinitely. There are no provisions for return transport, no budgetary allocations for repatriation, no contingency plans for voluntary departure. The systems that sustain her were designed around the assumption that anyone who reaches the moon would want to stay there forever. This administrative oversight transforms Lucy's exile from temporary displacement into permanent residence. She hasn't just fulfilled David's dying wish. She's been processed through corporate systems that treat her arrival as a one-way transaction, a resource allocation that cannot be reversed without significant cost and complexity that no one has authorized or planned for. The irony cuts deeper when Lucy discovers that her presence on the moon actually generates revenue for the corporations that maintain the facility. Her biometric data contributes to medical research about long-term space habitation. Her psychological profiles feed into algorithms designed to optimize future off-world colonial operations. Her very existence as a successful lunar resident validates investment projections and marketing materials for space development programs. She has become an unwitting test subject in humanity's expansion beyond Earth, providing data that will be used to convince other people to follow her path into the beautiful emptiness of off-world existence. Her suffering serves a purpose, but not one she chose or benefits from. The same corporate machinery that exploited her childhood continues to extract value from her adult misery. Lucy's daily routines become increasingly ritualistic as she attempts to impose meaning on activities that serve no purpose beyond maintaining her biological functions. She develops elaborate procedures for equipment maintenance that doesn't need performing, creates detailed schedules for tasks that could be completed in minutes, establishes protocols for monitoring systems that monitor themselves. These artificial complexities serve a psychological function, creating the illusion of purpose and productivity in an environment where neither exists naturally. But the effort required to maintain these self-imposed structures exhausts Lucy emotionally while providing no genuine satisfaction or sense of accomplishment. The communication delays between Earth and Moon mean that Lucy experiences all news as historical information, learning about events only after their consequences have been determined. Political developments, technological breakthroughs, cultural shifts, and social movements reach her as completed narratives, rather than unfolding stories she might have participated in or influenced. This temporal displacement transforms her relationship with information itself. As a netrunner, she had been accustomed to operating in real time, making decisions based on current conditions, responding to threats and opportunities as they emerged. Now every piece of information she receives comes with the knowledge that it describes a world that has already moved beyond the events she's learning about. The medical monitoring systems track her declining psychological state through physiological markers that the facility's automated systems cannot interpret correctly. Elevated stress hormones register as environmental adaptation rather than emotional distress. Disrupted sleep patterns are classified as circadian adjustment rather than trauma response. Decreased appetite appears in reports as metabolic optimization rather than depression. These medical misreadings reflect the broader failure of corporate systems to understand human beings as anything more than biological machines requiring maintenance and fuel. The technology that keeps Lucy alive cannot recognize that she is dying in every way that matters, that her perfect physical health exists alongside the complete breakdown of her emotional and spiritual well-being. Lucy begins to understand that David's final request wasn't just about giving her what he believed she wanted. It was also about giving himself the comfort of believing that his sacrifice would create something beautiful and meaningful. His dying wish served his psychological needs as much as hers, providing him with a narrative that made his death seem purposeful rather than tragic. This recognition doesn't diminish her love for David, but it adds another layer of complexity to her grief. She mourns not just his loss, but the loss of the illusion that his death had accomplished something worthwhile. She's trapped not just by her promise to him, but by her unwillingness to destroy his final moment of peace by acknowledging that his understanding of her needs was incomplete. The hydroponic systems that provide fresh food require constant attention to maintain optimal growing conditions. But this agricultural work becomes another form of psychological torture. Lucy tends plants that exist in the same sterile isolation that defines her own existence, nurturing growth that serves no purpose beyond sustaining her continued exile. These gardens represent life, reduced to its most basic functions, stripped of the chaos and unpredictability that make natural ecosystems vibrant and resilient. The plants grow according to programmed schedules, producing fruit and vegetables that taste like shadows of their earthly counterparts. Everything is technically correct, but spiritually empty. The facility's entertainment systems offer thousands of hours of content designed to distract from boredom and loneliness. But consuming this media becomes another form of voyeurism for Lucy. She watches other people's stories while having no story of her own, observes fictional characters, experiencing the love and adventure and purpose that she has lost. Romantic comedies become particularly painful because they remind her of the possibility for happiness that she briefly experienced with David. Adventure films torture her with images of people choosing danger and uncertainty over safety and predictability. Even documentaries about Earth's natural environments feel like visits to a world that no longer exists for her. The music collection proves most devastating because songs have the power to transport Lucy instantly back to specific moments with David. A particular melody triggers complete sensory memories, bringing back not just the sound of his voice, but the physical sensation of his presence, the emotional security of being loved by someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. These musical time travels become so intense that Lucy eventually stops listening to anything that might trigger memories of her former life. The silence that fills the facility becomes preferable to the emotional violence of accidentally encountering a song that reminds her of everything she has lost. The observation deck provides the most spectacular view available to human consciousness, a panoramic vista that includes Earth suspended in space like a blue jewel against the infinite darkness. This view should inspire awe and wonder, should provide perspective on humanity's place in the cosmos. Instead, it becomes a source of torment, because beauty without someone to share it with feels like mockery. Lucy spends hours staring at Earth through the massive reinforced windows, trying to identify weather patterns that might be affecting Night City at that very moment. She searches for signs of the life she abandoned, looking for evidence that the world continues to exist and change without her participation. But the distance that makes these observations possible also makes them meaningless. The stars that surround Earth in the lunar sky represent infinite possibility and absolute impossibility simultaneously. Each point of light marks another world, another potential destination, another place where life might be different. But the prospect of traveling to any of these distant worlds fills Lucy with horror rather than excitement, because every destination would be equally empty without David. Her understanding of her situation evolves as she processes the full scope of her psychological imprisonment. She recognizes patterns in her own behavior, sees how her trauma-informed responses to David's love had ultimately become the forces that destroyed what she was trying to protect. This self-awareness doesn't alleviate her grief, but it adds dimensions of regret and self-recrimination to her emotional landscape. The braindance recordings of her time with David reveal things she missed when the experiences were actually happening. She can see David's attempts to connect with her on deeper levels, his efforts to understand her fears and vulnerabilities, his willingness to accept her secrets if she had been willing to share them. The recordings become educational as well as nostalgic, teaching her about relationship and communication in ways that can no longer be applied. These digital memories also show her the person she had been during the happiest period of her life, and that person seems almost like a stranger now. The Lucy who laughed with David, who shared dreams and allowed herself to be vulnerable, feels like someone from another lifetime. The isolation and grief have changed her in fundamental ways that make returning to that earlier version of herself seem impossible. The facility's automated systems continue their relentless cycles, optimizing life support based on environmental conditions and biometric data, adjusting food production according to consumption patterns, maintaining communication arrays according to predetermined schedules. But these systems cannot adapt to Lucy's actual needs because her actual needs fall outside their operational parameters. They can keep her body functioning indefinitely while remaining completely useless for addressing the death of her spirit. They provide technical solutions to every practical problem while failing to recognize that the only problem that matters cannot be solved through engineering or programming or corporate efficiency. Lucy begins to understand that she exists in a space between spaces, neither fully alive nor completely dead, suspended in a technological limbo that maintains her biological functions while slowly draining away everything that made those functions worth sustaining. She has achieved the ultimate escape from earthly concerns by trapping herself somewhere that earthly concerns cannot reach, but earthly joys cannot reach either. The moon that promised freedom has become the stage for her ultimate captivity, beautiful in its perfect fulfillment of everything she thought she wanted, and terrible in its complete absence of everything she actually needed. She floats there in the reduced gravity of her accomplished dreams, weightless and ungrounded, carrying within her enhanced consciousness the unbearable weight of love that transformed into loss, hope that became despair, victory that feels indistinguishable from defeat. And in that crystalline moment of recognition, as Earth turns slowly in the window and the stars bear silent witness to her solitude, Lucy finally understands the true cruelty of getting exactly what you asked for without understanding what you actually needed. The moon cradles her in its airless embrace, as cold and beautiful and empty as the future that stretches ahead, unmarked by possibility or hope or the warm chaos of human connection that gives meaning to the vast darkness of space. The harsh reality settles into Lucy's consciousness like radiation poisoning, slow and invisible, but ultimately fatal. Each passing day on the lunar surface strips away another layer of the illusions that had sustained her through years of running and fighting and desperately hoping for something better. The moon, which had represented salvation in her darkest moments, now reveals itself as the most exquisite form of damnation ever devised by human ambition and corporate efficiency. The communication arrays that connect her facility to Earth carry signals that travel at the speed of light, yet somehow never fast enough to bridge the growing chasm between Lucy and the life she once knew. Messages from Earth arrive as archaeological artifacts, describing events that have already concluded, decisions that have already been made, consequences that have already unfolded. She exists perpetually in the past tense of human experience, learning about tomorrow's news yesterday while living in a present that feels increasingly disconnected from the flow of time itself. The medical monitoring systems embedded throughout the facility track every aspect of Lucy's physiological function with obsessive precision, generating reports that paint a picture of perfect health and optimal adaptation to the low-gravity environment. Her cardiovascular system has adjusted beautifully to the reduced atmospheric pressure. Her bone density remains within acceptable parameters, thanks to the mandatory exercise regimens. Her nutritional intake meets all recommended guidelines for long-term space habitation, but these clinical measurements cannot capture the slow death occurring in the spaces between heartbeats, in the silence between breaths, in the growing emptiness that expands like a black hole at the center of her consciousness. The technology that keeps her alive operates according to definitions of life that exclude everything that makes existence worth preserving. She has become a biological success story and a human tragedy simultaneously, proof that survival and living are not synonymous concepts. The hydroponic gardens that provide fresh food require constant attention, their artificial growing conditions demanding precise calibration of nutrients, light, and atmospheric composition. Lucy tends these plants with the mechanical precision of someone performing a sacred ritual whose meaning has been forgotten. The tomatoes grow red and perfect in their controlled environment. The lettuce spreads green and crisp under manufactured sunlight. The herbs release their programmed fragrances into recycled air that has never touched a natural wind. These gardens represent life, reduced to its most basic algorithmic functions, existence stripped of chaos and surprise, and the beautiful unpredictability that characterizes natural growth. The plants grow according to corporate specifications, producing food that sustains her body while providing no nourishment for the parts of her that hunger for meaning and connection and the messy vitality of uncontrolled experience. Lucy finds herself talking to these plants sometimes, addressing them as if they were capable of understanding or responding to human speech. She tells them about David, describes the life they might have shared together, explains the dreams that brought her to this sterile paradise where dreams go to die in perfect comfort. The plants continue growing according to their programming, offering no judgment or comfort or acknowledgement of her words. The facility's entertainment systems provide access to vast libraries of human culture, thousands of hours of movies and music and literature designed to distract from the essential loneliness of existence. But consuming this media becomes another form of torture for Lucy, each story serving as a reminder of the experiences she will never have, the connections she can never make, the adventures that exist only in the imagination of people who still live in worlds where such things are possible. Lucy's story stands as one of anime's most devastating explorations of how trauma shapes our deepest desires and how those desires can become prisons when we finally achieve them. Her journey from corporate slave to lunar exile reveals the cruel mathematics of survival in a world where love itself becomes a weapon that destroys what it seeks to protect. The moon that promised freedom delivered only the most beautiful form of captivity ever conceived, a paradise built from the ashes of everything that actually mattered. In the end, Lucy got exactly what she asked for, and that may be the most terrifying fate of all.